I think you could make a pretty strong case that Navi, Natus Vincere, the current five-man lineup they have, is arguably the best team in the history of CSGO not to win a major. I mean, I previously, when I did my top 20 all-time five-man lineups, I had Very Games 2013 as the best lineup not to have won a major, but I think you can put Navi ahead of them at this point in time. I mean, Navi's been in the final of two of the majors. They have been very good ever since they picked up flamie, but they really hit that elite level around Cluj-Napoca, beginning of November last year. And over the 13 tournaments they've played, including Cluj-Napoca and onwards, they've made top four at 11 of them. Only twice did they ever fail to. One was actually CEVO Season 8 finals, which was right after Cluj-Napoca, and the other time was obviously ESL1 Cologne, the last major. They've won three tournaments over that span of time. They won IEM San Jose, beating what was then, I think they were TSM at the time in the final, and now Astralis. They beat DreamHack Leipzig, beating Luminosity, now SK Gaming in the final, and they won Counterpit Season 2, beating Astralis in the final there. They've been in the final of 9 of those 13 lands. So they've been absolutely an elite level team, one of the best teams in the world. They were briefly for one edition at number 1 in my ranking when Fnatic lost some tournaments and Olaf Meister had gone from the lineup, and Luminosity hadn't quite taken over yet in terms of the lineup catching up. So they had their chance. They certainly could have been the best team in the world at one point in time. They're already one of the all-time great teams, but they've had their issues, and you can see that those problems are mounting, and now they look like a team who've fallen off even the peak that they were in 4 months, 5 months ago or so. So you got to look at this team first and foremost and say, let's look at the impact that Guardian has had and the effect he's had on this team, because this team's success with the original core really began with Guardian in CSGO. So in 2014, when they became a team that was a very dangerous Dark Horse team, it was all based around Guardian going ham. When he went ham, you could have a crazy tournament like that Star Series, I think it was Season 9, where he just went off completely and they won the tournament over a super stacked field. You know, we had Titan, we had Virtus Pro, we had NIP, the best teams in the world, and they won this tournament. Now, it was rare that they'd ever have a whole tournament like that. Usually what would happen is they'd make top 8s and they'd make top 4 finishes at big events, with Guardian going crazy on a map here or there, and that'd get you far enough, but you're never going to make the final of a major. You're never going to win a really big tournament. You might just win a smaller one every now and then. Now, in 2015, they got more help for Guardian because in came flamie, this really talented young player, but who had a lot of development still to make. And he didn't really do it. He had the odd tournament here and there, but the team continued to get better overall, slightly as a unit. And key thing is Guardian kicked into gear as much more of a reliable carry player in 2015. So by the summer of 2015, he's one of the best players in the world, the best AWPer in the world, and he's going God mode by the time you hit Cluj. Cluj was the event we really saw him get over his own problems at the majors, hit that God mode, carry them to the final. Even in the final, he was absolutely fantastic. Like, I thought he was the MVP of that tournament, quite frankly. I think it was even better than Kenny yesterday, even though MD has won the tournament. So from then on, Guardian was in God mode, and that lasted up until the next major, MLG Columbus, where unfortunately, obviously, injuries struck him. Now, the key detail that made the team go to the next level of being elite tier, not just very good, not just hovering right outside that elite tier, was not only was Guardian in God mode, but now flamie stepped up. Now flamie started to have those one-off tournaments more consistently. Now if you gave him 5 tournaments, he'd have 3 where he was very, very good and at a superstar level, where he really was a fantastic player himself. And so suddenly you had this legit 1-2 punch of big-time firepower in a Rifler and an AWPer in Guardian and flamie. Obviously transpose those in terms of the order I said it in. And suddenly Na'Vi was one of the best teams in the entire world. Then you add in obviously the impact of Starix coming in. So yeah, the key thing to me was now they had the tactical basis. They always had good tactics before. Zeus was a good in-game leader, but they had very predictable tactics. Now you had the same style, but you added in more variations, and because of Starix standing behind everyone and being a very intelligent player, he was able to execute it better within the team dynamic, and he'd worked to bring flamie out as this star player, as this great player, and then into the system, where before he'd been very much on his own within the system, kind of playing like a simple does in Team Liquid in terms of being allowed to do whatever he wanted, and sometimes not contributing as a result. So you had everything in place now. You've got Guardian, arguably the best player in the world. You've got flamie, superstar, top 5 player in the world. You've got a great system around you. Your map pool's gotten really deep. It was already very good, but now it's gotten really good, super deep. And so along came this Columbus final, where unfortunately we saw the impact of Guardian and how it had changed, and we saw how Na'Vi as a team had gotten much better. Because at MLG Columbus, what we actually saw here was, this was the tournament that actually showed how much Na'Vi had gotten better as a team outside of Guardian, because it was actually arguably the worst tournament in Guardian's entire career. He had been in God mode leading into that tournament. Like, just before it, he'd had Counterpit, where he'd had unreal numbers. He had 0.92 FPR, and they only played series against 3 maps against Flipside, 2 against Virtus Pro, and 3 against Astralis. So, 2 very good teams in the world. I mean, admittedly, Virtus Pro were in their slump at the time, but still a very legit LAN team that competed with you. And Flipside, obviously, always been a solid Tier 2 team and known how to match up against the Na'Vi guys. So he'd just come off a godlike performance there where he looked absolutely unbelievable. I thought he was the best player in the world at the time, arguably, since we didn't know. Well, I guess Olaf Meister as well, you could make the case for. Certainly up there. That was those 2 ahead of everyone. They came into Columbus and he had this terrible tournament here. He had 0.57 FPR, 0.64 DPR, deaths per round. So he had more deaths per round than he had kills, which is terrible for a star player. Even for an average player, that's not the case. And he had the lowest FPR of his entire career on LAN in CSGO. So he had a terrible performance, yet they made it to the final and almost won map 1, which was the map pick of Luminosity and Mirage. And Luminosity were one of the best teams in the world, if not the best team on that map at the time. And these guys came in and almost took that map and had a chance to win this final with Guardian playing terribly. Now, why was that possible? Because you had Starix's impact. You saw this tactical system had gone to even another level, and now it really could work against almost every team, and it would grind you down, and it would get consistent, efficient results no matter which pieces were firing. You had flamie, he was at his star power peak still, very good performance at that tournament, and then you had Edward, had this unreal rise in performance to where it was almost reminiscent of his 1.6 days where he was like the secondary star player. Suddenly he was playing fantastic, and obviously a big part of why they got past Astralis in the semi-finals. So you looked at that. The big problem with that tournament for me was everything else in the team was shown to be fantastic and work really well. But Guardian was so off, and obviously he had these huge issues in terms of his individual play. But you thought to yourself, okay, but if he comes back anywhere close to the Guardian that was in God mode before, now this team's developed to where they could be the best team in the world. They really could be their time to shine. And MLG Columbus seemed like their time to shine, but obviously they failed in the final. The problem is, then you see all the issues ever since then. So Guardian's dropped off. Ever since he came back from then, even when he initially said he was 100% in terms of his injury, he's never been a superstar player again. At best, he's gotten back to just being a star player now. Now, I always define as a general rule of thumb, I say star player if we're talking reasonably. If we're talking star player on an international context, it's like a top 10 player in the world. That's like a legit star for me. You can be a star of your team, like Tarek can be a star of CLG, but he's not a star player in an international context. I take superstar player, obviously there's some wiggle room here, but in general, it's usually like top 5 players in the world, like the biggest impact players, just players that individually you could put them in nearly every team and they'd be gods anywhere. So he's not a top 5 player by any stretch of the imagination right now. I think he's just hovering around being like a top 10 player, such a star at the moment, and even then his impact on the game has gotten much less, because you look at him on their T side, and his strength on their T side, you go back and look at Starladder, he's a big reason why their Cobble T side and their Train T side were monstrous, because they set it up around him, took map control, then let him get the picks he wanted and go head to head with the other player. The AWPer, the person who's taken the duel against him. And that's where he was so scary on the T side, because he's always been a good CT side AWPer in the past. This was where he made their system really go, though, and he was the engine inside that incredible machine. He is not that at all right now. Now he looks very hesitant on T side. Within their system and their strategies, it looks like they set up for him to take those shots, and he doesn't do it, or he's more hesitant, or he's more reticent to take those shots, or he just doesn't hit them as much now. He's not as crazy anymore. You don't see those insanely fast flicks that were just his trademark that he'd hit with routine consistency in his God mode era, late 2015, early 2016. flamie has had his issues over the last few months. Still a good player, still a very good player, star player. Problem is, now his fragging's dropped off. He's not hitting the same sort of crazy numbers he was. Zeus isn't the in-game leader and hasn't been for a while, but his fragging has really gotten a lot worse recently. And it feels like ever since 2016 began, he's been struggling, and he's really been the liability within the team. He still has some smarts about him to play in the game, but with their team, you have to wonder now, if he's not the in-game leader, how can he not be considered someone on the chopping block? He's clearly having his issues, and you could obviously get other players in there. Na'Vi used to be, in their prime earlier this year, the hardest team in the world to beat. And what I mean by that was, even in losses, you knew they were going to get double-digit rounds. They had the deepest map pool, so you were never going to get easy maps against them. They could go anywhere and potentially take you to 3 maps. They were so hard to beat, even when you got a big score on them when they were on CT side. When they switched to T-side, you knew that big roll was coming on most of the maps. The problem is, you go and look at that loss they had to Team Liquid in the quarterfinals of ESL 1 Cologne, the last major, and that third map is exactly where the old Na'Vi of earlier this year would have won that series. They wouldn't have dropped as many rounds overall. They would have been able to win out T-side. They would have been able to make the game very, very close. Instead, you saw their lack of superstar firepower by the way that Simple just styled all over them. If they'd have had flamie, they'd have had Guardian like they had earlier this year, they could have met that. They could have weathered that. They could have gotten the strong T-side, and they could have still won that game. They had their chances on Nuke, certainly. Obviously not a map they particularly like, but they had options there, and even there they had uncharacteristic flaws where their tactics broke down. People lost like weird clutch round situations that in the past people like Edward, people like flamie, you would have banked on them to win these. They were so good previously. So I actually think, unfortunately, this Na'Vi lineup, as great as they are, all-time great team, have missed their window. I think their window was MLG Columbus. I think that was their major to win. Because after Astralis took out Fnatic, that one team that the Na'Vi guys had a mental block against, I think that's the moment where if Guardian played at all decently, his injury hadn't inhibited him as much as it had at that one event, but hadn't previously, I think they win that tournament, actually. They were in the final. In the final, they had a fantastic map draw. They had Mirage, Overpass, Train. They're three best maps at the time, arguably. I mean, you could maybe say Cobble instead of Mirage, but it's still very strong maps for them. You'd think them winning 2 out of these 3, very doable. They almost won Mirage. Even if they'd have lost Overpass, they could have come back on Train. This would have been a fantastic series where they had a real chance to win and give Luminosity a proper run for their money. They only could do it on map 1, though, with Guardian with that 4 times his sensitivity or whatever the fuck, having no impact on Overpass. Then you got to look at the fact that cause now Fnatic has returned, not to being super dominant. I don't think they'll ever be at that level again. Who knows? But now that they've got Olofmeister back at a good level, Fnatic's back with that aggressive disrespect style, and that works against Na'Vi because Na'Vi already have the mental block against them. So you saw from Starladder onwards, these guys have just never been able to get over this Fnatic hump because that one was the real backbreaker. The ESL Pro League Season 2 finals at the end of last year, okay, they gave them a real battle there, and Fnatic just won through greatness. Starladder was Na'Vi getting mentally broken, and ever since then, it's been the same story, and in the E-League semi-finals, Fnatic absolutely mentally broke them on the first map and just had them basically knocked out, ready to give up at that point in time already. So you look at this team, okay, they still have pros to them. They still have reasons as to why they can be a very good team in the world. They've got depth, as in skill, balance, a number of the people fulfilling the roles is still very good. They can still be very good in this sense. They have the experience. Obviously, they played together a long time. They've got veteran players. That can help them out a lot. They've still got a great style and system. I think it still works. That's why they still got sick T-sides. CT sides dropped off a lot more because some of the key fragging from the superstars isn't there. And they still have a deep map pool. Their problem is, nowadays, there's not that many maps that are actually the best on anymore. So their map pool's deep, but winning out 2 of the 3 in a series isn't necessarily as guaranteed as it once was. Then you look at the cons, the problems in this team. Guardian, not a superstar, and yet the team has literally been defined by him for most of their careers. flamie has started to look a bit more troubled. Still a very good star player, but not only is his fragging dropped off, but within the system, he doesn't look as integrated. He looks a lot more frustrated himself, and like he gets mentally beaten down by it not working. Zeus has clearly fallen off a lot and has some issues. Edward is playing fantastically. He's had a real revitalization in his Counter-Strike career, but can he really maintain that? I would say probably not. I mean, this is even worse than the Scream scenario. I'd say this surely has to fall off Edward's insane fragging at the moment, and they just can't win in finals, and now they're not even making finals towards the end. So where do they go from here? Now, this video, when it comes out, we might already find out that maybe Simple's joined the team. That's a real option. If you go back in the past to old episodes of By the Numbers, Richard always used to ask me, what can Na'Vi do in like middle of 2015? And I used to say to him, at some point in time, since at the time Na'Vi was very much based around Guardian and flamie was inconsistent, they have to look at the fact that if the rest of the machine works, remember Zeus was the in-game leader at the time, so Seized and Edward are great role players. You have to look at it and say, do we have to replace flamie with Simple? Because Simple was an incredible one-man carry at the time. So you thought Simple and Guardian, now we're really cooking with gas. Now we can do a lot here. So Simple joining certainly an option, but it feels like at the moment, the player they'll replace is Zeus because he's not really doing anything. So I could even see that. I think logically that is the right player to remove. You could also remove Guardian because he's not from CIS, obviously. I still don't know how fluent his Russian is because he's a very quiet player. And he seems like he doesn't necessarily enjoy their system himself at the moment because he's kind of hesitant. So that's an option, certainly, if you want to just go straight all CIS region. I think another option should be Adren, if they don't get simple. Adren instead of Zeus, another veteran, someone else who's very intelligent. But this is a guy who's got a much improved fragging, a guy who wins a lot of clutch rounds. I think that would be a great option to go with, Adren from Gambit. So I think there's a lot of different ways you can go. But unfortunately, I think this lineup of Na'Vi has run its course. As in, it can still be a top 4, top 5 team. Can still, maybe it can have a crazy run every now and then. But it's not going to be that team that's in every final like it was before. And unfortunately, they've missed their window to be the best team in the world, to win the titles. And now it's SK's time. And now Fnatic's back to be their nightmare again. And VP's even there to be kind of the crazy outlier. So I feel like they missed their window. And as great as they are, and they will be remembered as one of the best lineups of all time to watch and to see compete in terms of the greatness, day-to-day excellence from this team. Very impressive. Unfortunately, they never got that ultimate goal. And the machine never fulfilled its programming.